Hello and welcome to Satisfactory 1.1. This is the experimental branch, and we'll be looking at the hypertubes, but more specifically the hypertube junction and hypertube branch. And you unlock this as part of the hypertube milestone. So I've got over here a quick little setup just to kind of show what these do. So the hypertube junction is 2 encased industrial beams, 2 steel beams and 5 copper sheets, and it's basically the same for the branch except it's 2 steel pipes. So a normal setup for a hypertube link would be something like this. You can see the direction that it was going in, those little lines, but when you go in this way you can use the hypertube branch there to change direction. So when you're in the hypertube you have to press E, and you could see the change in direction there. I'll just do it again. So it will normally go straight, but if I just go in again, there you are. So it will normally go straight unless you choose to change direction. So at least that's a good way to figure out which direction you are going in. If I don't press anything, I just go ahead as normal, so no difference there. Now if instead I were to put down this, you can sort of clip it to the floor. If you rotate it here you can see how it's in line to the left, but the other 2 parts are not in line with a north, south, east and west, so you have to make sure you get this in the right direction. So if I were to do it like that, get the hypertube connected, I can do that. Then I'll show you what this is like. So when you go into one of these junctions, you can choose which one you come out of. So if I don't know which one it defaults to, so it looks like it defaults to the left. So if I go back in this one, yep, it defaults to the left. But if I do it from this direction, because it will be a bit easier, if I were to cycle, there you are, it goes to the right. Now if I go back in, it still goes to the left. I still had to change it myself. It still goes to the left. So that's the way those 2 little sections work. The hypertube junction will always go to the left, and the hypertube branch will always go straight ahead. So the hypertube branch you can place onto an existing hypertube that you already have, and you can just have it come out here. So you can probably build huge tons of... Oops, that didn't work. You can probably build huge tons of these and have the hypertubes go in all sorts of directions. This, however, this junction, you can't build on an existing track, because if the hypertube goes straight forward, the junction doesn't work. So let's see what happens here. So you can see it going straight ahead. There you are, and I've changed it that direction. So one good way of using this would be to have a big hypertube network that goes around the whole map, that has little tentacles coming off it, and those tentacles can have hypertube cannons feeding into it. And it could be, well, you only need the one hypertube really, because you could just use a junction to choose which direction you go in, and then maybe branches here and there just to kind of feed off. But one way you could also do it is, let's say, oh actually I should show you as well. So you have this new build mode curve, so it will be, if I put it maybe to here, you can see how it's going off in slightly different direction. If I rotate it so it's 90 degrees, it's a nice consistent curve that goes round. Whereas the other way, so auto, doesn't quite do that. It just sort of takes the path of least resistance. Auto 2D is a bit more straight. Noodle is a little bit like curve, but curve does it a bit better. Horizontal to vertical is obviously going down like that. So if I were to keep it on curve, and then if I put one of these down here, so if I were to without placing it, if I were to move the mouse wheel, it just flips kind of the orientation. If I were to select it, then use the mouse wheel, I can then make it go over this way. Then what I can do here is use my Hypertube junction. Imagine this on a much bigger scale. There you are, put that there. So the idea would be that you have almost like a big triangle network of Hypertubes here that the Hypertubes can go in. So I've got Hypertubes in this world that fling me really, really far, but I've got a blueprint set up where I can use these Hypertubes just to go along the train network, and this will be where the Hypertube branches and junctions will be really handy, because that way you can combine it with the train networks in the central parts of the train network, so where it kind of feeds off and goes to the side. That will be really useful to have the Hypertube branches and the junctions, because it will be a great way. I forgot that one did that. It will be a great way to figure out. It'll be a great way to really explore the world and have a. And so by having the branches and junctions on these sort of train track blueprints, it will be a great way to get across the whole world fairly quickly, but also in quite a seamless way. And I can't wait to see how people integrate it with their transport networks that they have in the world. So thank you very much for watching. I'll have a look at some of the other 1.1 editions.